For the third year and counting, Richard Skipper has been celebrating the artists you love. Richard Skipper is all about celebrating life, art, and his guest body of work. Please join us while he showcases these diverse and talented individuals. Here's Richard Skipper.
Happy Monday, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Richard Skipper Celebrates. Who or what are you celebrating today? This is the last week of summer. We're going into autumn, and so many things to celebrate if you take the time to do so. I am so excited about tonight's show because someone that I think the world of is going to be on the show again tonight, and that's Luke Yankee. Before I get to Luke, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors tonight. First of all, Aaron Calev of EMC Studios in New Jersey, Deborah Stone, who has a show coming up at the Laurie Beachman Theater next month on October 9th, and also Kurt Peterson, who has a new show on October 10th. So October's already turning out to be a very busy month. So Luke Yankee, alone, he's enough to celebrate. But he has a new book out called The Art of Writing for the Theater. And he leaves no stone unturned. And he makes life very easy for those of us in this business. Want to know how easy he makes it? He even gives us a promo to start the show with. So here it is. I'm going to start with that, and then I've got a little surprise for him. Here it is.
What do you love about the theater?
I love the bargain we make between the audience and the theater makers. We're going to create the world here. We want you to pretend it's real.
I love theater because, objectively speaking, it's kind of ridiculous.
Whatever you're writing about, it's coming organically from something inside of you. Whether this happened in your life, maybe not, but the emotions and concerns are real. Those come from you.
The thing that makes you unique, that makes you idiosyncratic, that makes you weird, that's your superpower as a writer.
You know, all kinds of stories begin with one person that wants one thing.
The best theater, character, and story are seamlessly woven together throughout the play. Ideally, it becomes more complex as it goes along.
So the line is authentic to that character, but it wasn't quite what I expected. I think the audience member pricks up their ears and listens, becomes an active participant.
You shouldn't be able to tell what came first. Lyrics first, music first. If it's done right, it should be seamless. You wouldn't know whether the music came first or the lyric first.
In order to write, you have to sit down. And if you sit down and you stay down long enough, something will happen.
As playwrights, I think we still believe in the power of magic because I think words can still have such an impact. They can shift and transform not only how we think, but then history in the making. There's a magic in that.
So Luke is waiting in the wings, but there was a very special person who wanted to be here tonight. He couldn't be here, but he sent a very special message for you. This is from Scott Ellis.
Luke, Scott Ellis. I'm on set, actually, early in the morning out in Connecticut. But I wanted to just send you a note to congratulate you on your book, which, I read and I loved. and I think it's just so good, so smart. And one of my biggest joys I've had in the theater was to work with your mom, and then an extra bonus was to get to know you. So congratulations, and I know it's going to do great. People need to read it. Bye.
Hello, Luke.
Hello, Richard. How wonderful. I'm so touched. I just sent an email to Scott Ellis this morning. We were corresponding yesterday and today, and what a beautiful way to start. Thank you so much for that lovely
Well, he
gift.
wanted to be here tonight. I've got other surprises up my sleeve, so don't worry. But anyway, we're celebrating you tonight. This is your life, Luke Yankee. So first of all, as I always do with all of my shows, I begin by asking who or what are you celebrating, besides the fact that you have this incredible book out, which we're going to jump into in just a moment, and the fact that you've been on this amazing trip. Oh my God, I've been living vicariously through you and your photographs on Facebook. Those of you who are not friends of his on Facebook, well, I apologize to all of you because these photographs are just incredible.
Thank you. Yes, in fact, it was a trip that was postponed because of the pandemic. And so it was a 25th anniversary trip for my husband and I. We did a cruise from Prague to Budapest and down the Danube. And it was absolutely extraordinary. So we wound up doing it for our 27th instead of our 25th. But boy, so many things to celebrate, which I want to talk to you about. Not only the book, but my play, Marilyn, Mom and Me, which hopefully we'll touch on briefly, is getting a lot of attention. And lining up book signings at the Drama Bookshop in New York and Book Soup here on the West Coast. And just, you know, Richard, at the moment, I'm in one of those phases of my life where I feel like every day is a celebration.
Well, my husband and I are going to Africa on an African safari with Lucy Arnaz, God willing, in February. We were scheduled to do that for my 60th birthday, and now it looks like we're going to be doing it for my 62nd birthday, which is coming up in February. And it's just like this stop and start process that we're in. Did you write a lot of this book during COVID, or was a lot of this written prior to COVID? What was your process in terms of writing the book?
Actually, Richard, I did write a lot of it during COVID because, as you well know, I've had a very successful career in the theater. And about 7 years ago, I decided to go back and get my master's degree so that I also had the option of teaching. And once I did that, the floodgates opened. And one of my colleagues at Cal State Fullerton, where I'm currently the head of playwriting, a brilliant man of the theater named Jim Voles, who's, he was one of the founders of the Alabama Shakespeare Company, and he's just done so many extraordinary things in the theater. He contacted me and he said that he was an editor for this series called Introductions to Theater, which is sponsored by Methuen Drama, which is the biggest publisher, one of the biggest publishers of theater books in the world. And they're under the banner of Bloomsbury Press out of London. And so he said, Luke, we've been looking for someone with exactly your skill set to create a book that is an introduction to playwriting, theater criticism, and script analysis. So in addition to all of those things, because of the pandemic and because people were available, I also did interviews with 18 world-class, Pulitzer Prize winning, Tony winning, in some cases Oscar winning playwrights, lyricists, critics, librettists. And I want to talk more about those as we get going, because every one of those interviews was like a masterclass for me. It was just
got clips of those on YouTube, and they're just, I mean, are you going to publish all of those in the full form?
Actually, Richard, what I'm ultimately looking to do with those is that kind of one of the next steps is that I'm going to create an online course. And while it will be me giving some of the how-to information, then I will say, for instance, and here's Marcia Norman talking about the art of collaboration and how she collaborated on The Color Purple and things like that. So that's down the line, and I'm very excited about that as one of the next steps.
Now, she sends her regrets tonight as well. I reached out to a few of these people.
Clearly.
Yes.
I'm impressed.
Yes, and she, sends her regrets that she was not able to be here tonight as well. But you grew up in the theater. I mean, those who watch the show know that normally, and I did this with you the last time, I asked for a 5-year-old photograph the last time. This time, I went a little older. And I did this because you mentioned in your book your 9-year-old self going to the theater in your tux. I love this photograph. I'm going to share it with everyone. Here you are. You haven't changed a bit.
Oh God, I hope I have.
No, you haven't. Maybe the hair is a little different. And then here you are with your gorgeous mom backstage, Eileen Heckard.
That was actually, Richard, that was taken backstage on the opening night of Butterflies Are Free.
Yes, but I wanted to ask, what are your memories of first of all, seeing your mom on stage at such an early age, and were you able to separate your mom from the actress?
That's a good question. Most of the time I was, Richard. In fact, she was doing so much television when I was a little boy, and as she continued to, but always loved the theater first and foremost. And I think I was somewhere around 7 or 8 before I realized not all the kids in the neighborhood sat around and watched their moms on television on Saturday night. But I mean, it was so thrilling being in my little tiny tuxedo at age 10 there, watching Mommy, on Broadway. And it happened to be a hit.
That's always nice.
That is always nice. And actually, I have a little confession to make. That is actually I talk about in the book. I talk about another opening prior to that, and I couldn't find a photo from that one. It was the year before, and it was a play she did called The Mother Lover that opened and closed on the same night.
Well, I'm glad you bring this up, because in this business, we are, all of us, yourself included, we are on a constant emotional roller coaster. Yeah. It seems as if we are, I think of the song from Pinocchio, I've Got No Strings, but we are constantly being pulled by the strings of agents, managers, audiences, critics, everyone, and thank you for putting that section in the book as well. But we are constantly at the whims and of so many people. This is the one, I can't think of another profession that, and I think of it more of it as a calling, that I can't imagine anyone wanting to go into a profession where it's almost as if we are all sparrows beating against the wind constantly, of any other profession, where you go to school, you get a degree, and you have a career, and a career that takes you, for the most part, through 25, 30 years, then you retire. But in this business, it's the business that retires you in most instances. You've experienced both the ups and downs with your mom.
And with myself.
And yourself as well. If you can talk a little bit about that, the ups and downs of a career, and getting through that. And then, of course, we'll get to your book, and, and also the ups and downs of writing this book, and the process that you went through.
Richard, starting with the first part of your question about the career, I mean, my parents were hoping I would not go into show business because they knew how difficult it was. They knew what a hard life it was. And I watched my mother go through lots of ups and downs. I mean, after, I believe it was 4 Tony nominations and countless other awards, she went through a period where she didn't work for nearly 2 years. And I mean, it's like that famous story that so many people know in Hollywood before Betty Davis did Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, where she took out a full-page ad in Variety saying, for your consideration, Miss Betty Davis available for employment. I mean, that's crazy.
Yes.
And as you say, where else does that happen? but I did get to see what it takes. And one of the things, Richard, that where I consider myself so blessed for so many reasons, but one of them is that from a very early age, I saw every aspect of this business. And, as I talked about in my other book, Just Outside the Spotlight, I was able to sit at my mother's feet, and while she would be entertaining Mary Tyler Moore and Teresa Wright and Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward, and I sat there like a sponge and soaked it all up. And everything from how to take a good curtain call to what Liz Smith said in her column the day before, from the time I was a little boy. So I really think that prepared me, if anything could, prepare one for the ups and downs.
Well, I love the fact that you just said that. Excuse me for interrupting, but you just mentioned the fact that you were a sponge, and that is still something that's very much a part of who you are today.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. And in fact, when I was doing these interviews for the book, that was one of the things that was so fascinating for me, because I have a number of published plays myself and produced plays. And yet, here I am interviewing the likes of Marcia Norman and David Henry Hwang and David Lindsay Abaire and Octavio Solis, and these incredible playwrights. And I won't lie, I was more than a little intimidated with some of them. And what I found, Richard, with every single one of them is there was this sense of, if I can do it, you can do it. And there was this sense of, one of the things I asked them all about was the imposter syndrome. Because there's this wonderful thing that I always quote in Tom Stoppard's The Real Thing, where it's this famous actress who's going to her first day of rehearsal, and she's talking to one of the young journeymen in the company and saying how nervous she is. And he says to her, why are you so nervous? You're such a pro. And she said, every time I start rehearsal for a new play, I say to myself, this is the one where I get found out.
Wow.
And I think that's such a common thing. And every one of these playwrights felt the same way. It's like that incredible story about Oprah Winfrey, whether she's interviewing, Queen Elizabeth, God rest her soul, or, all these great political leaders. And every one of them after the interview would say, was that all right? Was I okay? Because we all want that approval, and we all suffer from that imposter syndrome to one extent or another.
Well, going back to Marcia Norman for a moment, Night Mother, and in your interview with her, the portion that I was able to see, and I can't wait to see the whole thing, and I can't wait to sign up for that masterclass, hopefully. But she talks about, we know Night Mother, but all the other plays that we don't know about that don't get published. And that's the whole thing, that we see that moment of success that a playwright has, but we don't see everything that led up to that. We don't see, and you break it down so beautifully in your book, the exposition and everything. You talk about the imposter syndrome. When was it the most devastating for you? Or have you ever experienced the imposter syndrome? And how do you get through something like that?
Richard, I think it's really just a matter of fake it till you make it. I mean, just really,
that's what I do every day.
I mean, frankly, I have enough of an acting background that you just sort of sail through and I'm very fond of saying, and in fact, occasionally I even say this to my students, sometimes I feel that my degree shouldn't really be an MFA, it should be an MSU, because I make shit up. I mean, in the middle of a lecture, sometimes with my students, in the middle of a lecture with my students, I'll go off on a tangent, and it's just like, wow, I just made that up, and it sounded really good. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
It's funny, Howard Tucker was watching, he said he had never heard of imposter syndrome until he started watching my interviews. Everybody in this business knows what the imposter syndrome is. We've all experienced it. You wear so many hats so brilliantly, at least from where I sit.
Thank you.
which one of the hats do you feel that you wear the most comfortably?
That's a really good question, and I feel like it changes. I've been wearing the directing hat for a long time now, but I'm really sort of coming into my own as a writer and feeling much better about that hat. Initially, I started writing so that I would have things to direct. But now I kind of wear both of those hats and really enjoy them both for different reasons. But, Richard, I want to back up to something you said a moment ago when you were talking about critics. And one of the things I talk about in my book, about the chapter on criticism, is the sense of when people in show business go to the theater or a concert or whatever, but for the sake of argument, I'll say the theater, with what I call a civilian, somebody who is not in the business. And it is very common, especially for a theater student or someone who is in the process of learning, to go to a play, for instance, or musical with a civilian and just say, all right, let me tell you how bad that was. And let me tell you, and just sort of rip it apart and destroy it for the non-theater person. And so that's something I really discourage people from doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's so much more genteel and so much more considerate. If you go to a play with someone, or as I said, a concert or whatever the venue may be, and even if you hated it, you say to the person you went with afterwards, so how did you like it? And if they say, oh, I loved it, you say, that's great. Tell me what you loved about it. And then keep your mouth shut.
Thank you.
I had this moment years ago where I went to the theater with Julie Newmar. And it was a comedy, and Julie said to me afterwards, you didn't really laugh once, Luke. Didn't you enjoy it? I said, yes, I did, but I was studying it. I was studying the performance. And as you well know, when one is in it, when one is in the weeds, that's what one does. And another thing I talk about in the book is that old story about if you tell a really wonderful joke to a stand-up comic, they'll go, that's funny. That's really funny.
That's right.
Because they're studying it and they're figuring out what made it funny. They're figuring out the mechanics of it and they're looking at the technique. Whereas a civilian, as I said, would just be laughing at the joke.
I want to talk about you as a writer.
Great.
You are a great playwright.
Thank you.
You've written a great memoir, and you've written an academic book, but you've made it entertaining.
Thank you.
In all three, do you have the same approach as a writer to all three to all three of those areas, or differently?
No, I think I pretty much do have the same approach, Richard, in that, first of all, I tend not to think of this as an academic book. It can certainly be used as one. And yes, I'm using it in some of my classes, and absolutely it can be used in that regard. But because of the interviews, because of the other sections of it, I like to think of it as more than that. But I try to come across, because when one thinks textbook, one thinks dry as sawdust many times. And I try not to do that.
Everybody. So it's a great book.
Thank you. And I try to come across with this as if I do in my classes, where I'm really talking and saying, okay, let's explore this and let's take a look at, you want to know how to do this? Well, this is how I do it, and you might want to try this. So I try to come across with a very conversational tone in the book, and I certainly did that in my memoir, Just Outside the Spotlight, and to a certain extent, I do that with my plays as well. And I spoke last time about my play Marilyn, Mom and Me, which is a wonderful, if I do say so, a very intimate, wonderfully intimate story about my mother's intense friendship with Marilyn Monroe during the shooting of the film Bus Stop, where she played her best friend, and how deeply that impacted my mother, and ultimately how it impacted me as her son. And I'm very proud of the fact that it's won several awards. It's starting to get a lot of attention. And as a matter of fact, for those of your viewers who are in the New York City area, there is going to be a reading of it in Manhattan for the New Work series at the Emerging Artists Theater Festival on October 19th. And I'd be happy to share some more information about that. Very limited.
Give me all the information. I will make sure it's all on my YouTube channel. And will it be the same actresses that did the reading before that you did?
The one that we did as a benefit for the Actors Fund and also for Broadway Cares. Yes.
Did on it was a Zoom reading that I saw.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. It was a Zoom reading that was just up for a limited period of time because it was a fundraiser for Broadway Cares and also for the Actors Fund. Yes.
Brilliant. I have another clip that I want to share.
Great.
Someone else who wanted to be here tonight who could not be here, and then we're going to talk about a giveaway in just a moment. Here it is.
Hey Luke, greetings from California. Happy and Lucky and I wish you great success with your terrific book. Congratulations. Hope you have a great celebration with Richard. Bye.
My dear friend David Zippel, who I also interviewed for the book. How dear that he did that. I'm so touched.
And his wonderful dog. So I'm glad that they were able to be a part of this.
I'm amazed they sat still.
I chose spirit of adventure as our phrase of the day instead of the word of the day. I was reading something and that phrase jumped out this morning, and I thought that was the perfect phrase for you because you absolutely lived that. Growing up in the world that you grew up in, and that you still have this. I don't see you. When you grow up as the child of a star or someone in this business, you can go in one of two different directions. And I have had the good fortune of knowing many who have gone in the other direction. Yes. But I look at you, and I look also at Lucy Arnaz. And neither one of you, there isn't 1 ounce of pretense with either of you. So kudos to your parents in terms of something went right with everything.
Well, thank you. And I adore Lucy. I mean, we both live out in Palm Springs, and she's absolutely wonderful. But, I must say, her mother was a superstar. My mother was a Broadway character actress who sort of branched beyond that and had a great deal of success. But, my mother used to say, honey, thank God I don't have Elizabeth Taylor's problems. I mean, she loved being able to go down the street and not be recognized. Or somebody would say, now you remind me of, and she loved that. She really loved that. She didn't like... Again, she was all about the work, and as is, Lucy Arnaz all about the work, and not to say her mother wasn't, but again, my mother didn't have that kind of celebrity. So up in Connecticut, she used to say, "Honey, I'm just plain Mrs. Yankee." Well, there was nothing plain about her, and she was certainly very well known up there. But it was easier for me because she wasn't that kind of superstar.
Well, I pulled up another one of my favorite photos of you and your mom that is also on your Facebook page. But I love this photograph. Just look, there's just so much fun in that photo here. What is the circumstance behind this photo?
Richard, I was in my first New York apartment, and she was staying the night. I don't remember why, but she was staying over, and I just asked my roommate to snap a picture of the two of us. And I actually, that year, I had that, and you can barely see the cigarette in her hand, as always.
Yeah.
And I framed this photo and gave it to her for Christmas that year. And I said, this is the way I always want to remember us.
Wow, it's great. Getting back to the book, when you sat down to write the book, did the book unfold as you had imagined the book would unfold?
To some extent, because it never occurred to me that I would write a how-to book. And with your theme today, in the spirit of adventure, I'm one of those people who is really good at saying yes. I mean, sometimes I feel like I go fire, ready, aim. I mean, I agree to do something and then I'm like, oh my God, what did I just agree to? And I felt that way a little bit with the book, but then it's like, wait a minute, Luke, you've been teaching this stuff for a number of years now, and it won't be that difficult. I mean, the thing that was tricky about it was juggling it with a full school schedule, teaching 5 and 6 classes a term, and also writing plays and doing all the directing shows and doing all the other things that I do. But I'm one of those people who works really well on a deadline. And it's the most exciting part were the interviews. And I reached out to, and some of the people, I was on the board for the William Inge Theater Festival for a number of years. So about 20 years to be exact. And there were a number of people I knew from the Inge Festival, like Marcia Norman, like David Henry Hwang, some of the others. That's where I first met Scott Ellis, as a matter of fact. And so I was able to reach out to some of those people. But for instance, Ben Brantley, New York Times theater critic for more than 30 years. I didn't know him at all. And I just reached out to him and said, Mr. Brantley, I so admire you and your work, and would you consider? And he was like, yeah, sure. It's like, really? And so it was, as I said, it was just a tremendous gift. And after I did every one of these hour-long interviews, I was high as a kite, in the best sense of the word.
Amazing. Well, that's how I feel after every interview. It's euphoric.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, exactly. And people like Marcia Norman, and Marcia Norman in particular, who was the head of playwriting at Juilliard with Christopher Durang for many, many years. And she would say, now, write this down. Marcia says, and it was wonderful. And then, of course, Donald Margulies, who's the head of playwriting at Yale, David Lindsay Abaire, who took over for Marcia at Juilliard, and just really, and then some people who are not so well known, but who are equally amazing. Ismail Khalidi, who is the foremost Palestinian American playwright. Naomi Wallace, who is a brilliant writer, and oh my goodness, some of the things that she said were just extraordinary. And one of the things about Naomi that not many people know, she is, I think it's safe to say, she's a little better known, while she's certainly respected in theatrical circles here, she's a little better known in the UK than she is here, because that's where her home base is. And part of that is because her work is extremely political. And but one of the things about her is that she is the only American playwright besides Tennessee Williams to have a play in the permanent repertoire of the Comédie Française. And she's just extraordinary. And she also said, well, if you're going to interview me, I want to get to know you. So would you send me one of your plays? Well, I was so honored. So I sent her Marilyn, Mom and Me. And there's a line early on where the character of Eileen, based on my mother, she's digging through a box of pastries and she says, no bear claws? And so Naomi's opening line after she read the play was, you had me at bear claws.
That's wonderful.
I was so honored and so touched.
As you sit down with the interviews, did you have a list of who you wanted to go after, or did that unfold as you went along?
I did have a list. A couple of people were just too darn busy, which I can certainly respect. Yes. But there were very few people who turned me down. And especially it's once I got sort of the ball rolling with a few people, people were like, wow, you've got some really great writers there. I'd love to be in that company.
And so did COVID have a lot to do with the accessibility of some of the writers?
I think it did, Richard, because for a number of them, their commissions and their projects had been put on hold. So they were more accessible. And I don't know that, and again, while they were incredibly gracious, I don't know that many of them would have been quite so easy to reach had it not been for that. So that was definitely, it was a way of turning the pandemic into a win-win.
How long have you been teaching?
I've been teaching for 5 years now. And as I mentioned before, I'm the head of playwriting at Cal State Fullerton, and I also teach playwriting and musical theater at Chapman University. And just, and Richard, one of the reasons that it's so important to me to teach is that, coming full circle, if I may, having grown up in this theatrical household and having been given so many gifts at a very early age, I feel a tremendous responsibility to give some of that back. So that's why, even before I had my degree, I would teach in between my directing projects or my acting projects back in the day. And really, I'm glad I can now do so at the university level and in a more consistent fashion.
And do you still pursue acting projects?
Not really. I have a one-man show about the golden age of Broadway and Hollywood called Diva Dish.
Yes, it's wonderful.
That I still do occasionally. I do it for benefits or things like that. And in fact, I was just, this cruise we just did, the cruise director was this lovely Scottish man. And I'm sorry, he was the entertainment director. And so he loved my stories. And, being the shy, retiring wallflower that I am, I had to grace him with a few of them. So by the end of the week, he was saying, "Oh, we've got to get you booked on a cruise." So I'm hoping that next summer I might be doing my one-man show on a lovely European cruise somewhere.
Well, keep me posted, because maybe that's a cruise that we'll take.
Well, I've actually done it on about 25 cruises around the world, and but not for a while now that other things have come up. But it's lovely when I need a good getaway to sort of take it out and dust it off. And in fact, I'm going to be doing it on the West Coast at the Rancho Mirage Library, just outside of Palm Springs in, I believe the date is February 1st.
Okay. And what were some of the aha moments that you had with the interviews that you were able to get with this book?
One of my favorite stories, and it's actually one of my favorite showbiz stories. I don't know that I'd call it so much of an aha moment, although it probably is, the more I think about it, is that David Henry Hwang, when he was starting out and was a young, struggling playwright, he had written a play called FOB, which stands for Fresh Off the Boat, about Asian American immigrants. And so he had a meeting with Joe Papp back when Joe Papp was just the legendary impresario of the theater and off Broadway and all of that. So he had a meeting with Joe Papp, and he said, "Okay, so now that we've done this reading, I have some notes for you." And David sat there with his pad, feverishly taking down all of these notes. And he said, "Yes, so you go back and you work on those notes, and then maybe we'll think about doing a production." So David got home and he looked at all of these notes and he thought, "I don't agree with any of these. And I know he's Joe Papp, but this is just not the play I want to write." So he waited about 10 days and he sent the exact same script to Joe Papp. And Joe Papp's response was, "Oh, it's so much better. We'll produce it now." And he hadn't altered a single comma. But I love that story on so many levels. I mean, first of all, the chutzpah of him as a young playwright to be able to do that to someone like Joe Papp. But more than that, he knew what worked, and he stuck to his guns. And ultimately it worked. And, needless to say, look at his track record. I mean, he's become one of the preeminent playwrights of the American theater.
But that story encapsulates all of show business in a nutshell. Right? Yes. That tells you everything everybody needs to know about this business. And
absolutely.
I mean, a lot of times as a writer, I could almost guess, having not been at a table read, that first table read, when you have A friend of mine who's a playwright, she said the other day, I mean, when you write into play and you put that on paper, and then you go in for that first table read and you hear the words out loud for the first time around the table, and then there's inevitably someone in that room who feels, having never written a word in their life, that they know better than anything you've done what is best for this piece. And sometimes, based on their history, you may put a lot of trust in them, and it may not necessarily be the right decision to go on. As a playwright, how do you make the decision in terms of how you move forward?
Well, Richard, what you say is absolutely true. And I think it's so difficult. And I think what you're talking about is something that many writers, many artists of all varieties learn the hard way. You listen to people, and sometimes it works and sometimes not. So really, as an artist, one has to listen to one's gut. And ultimately, it's your play. And it really comes down to what you feel is best going to serve the work, because everybody is going to give you their good opinion. And sometimes they'll be valid and sometimes they won't. And so it takes a while. That's why one of the reasons I love about that story of David Henry Hwang is that to have that sort of insight and to have that sort of strength he was about, I think, around 25 or something at the time. I mean, to have that sort of conviction and confidence at that age is just amazing, because I have made that mistake of listening to people and going, oh boy, that was wrong. Another little anecdote, a little off topic, but sort of coming back to it, is my mother did a play called I Can't Hear You When the Water's Running, directed by Alan Schneider. Mm-hmm. And Alan was a brilliant director. I mean, directed so many of Albee's plays originally, and was so many of Samuel Beckett's plays. And he was one of those directors who, long into the run, was notorious for coming backstage and giving copious notes. And there was one night, and some of the other actors just threw them away without even reading them. But my mother would always read them, because for every 3 crappy ones, the 4th one might be brilliant. So there was one night where he said, darling, I'll bet you $5 if you punch this line twice as hard, you will double the laugh. And she thought, I know comedy, and I really don't think he's right about that. But he's my director, so I'll try it. So the next night, she punched the line twice as hard, nothing. Crickets. A line that had been getting a really good laugh, no laugh. So his next night's notes started with, darling, I owe you $5. I often, when I'm directing, I'll often tell that story to my students and say, okay, this may be an I owe you $5 kind of note, which means let's try it.
You never know sometimes until you do try it. But what advice do you give to playwrights in today's world, where everyone wants to be so politically correct, yes. Especially we're living in a very precarious world right now. Yes. Just a couple of weeks ago, Tom Hanks apologized for doing Philadelphia, because as a straight man, he didn't feel that it's a role that he would have taken on in today's world. But for playwrights and actors, as an actor myself, I've always felt that our job as actors is to shed light on the human condition. Absolutely. And I feel that if that is taken away, we all want to be respectful, but we also, we're not going to go out and do a caricature like Mickey Rooney doing the Japanese character in Breakfast at Tiffany's. Right. We all know that was wrong in hindsight. But we also, there are certain, I don't have any qualms with a straight actor playing a gay man and vice versa, if it's done with the respect that the character deserves. I would love to get your take on this.
Wow. You know, Richard, being in the world of academia, I feel like this particular issue or issues that you're talking about, they can be a minefield. And I had an experience last semester where a couple of my students were very upset that I was teaching that misogynistic, woman-hating play, A Streetcar Named Desire. And it's like, excuse me? This is, you know, oh yes, Tennessee Williams was such a woman hater, but pardon me. But I look forward to the day that the pendulum begins to swing back the other way, because I think we are in an era of extremism. And I am not of the belief that a straight actor can only play straight roles, or a straight writer can only write straight roles. And, you know, as a writer and as an artist of all kinds, I observe humanity. And I'm one of those people, like I think many artists, who tries to know a little bit about a lot of things. And in some areas, a lot about a lot of things. But to be able to say, you can't, for instance, to say to me, I can't direct a certain play because, you know, it's like the old argument about, well, how can you play Macbeth if you haven't murdered someone? I mean, that's kind of an extreme example, but it's, as I said, it's a very slippery slope. And while I respect the fact that certain artists and especially artists of color, are now coming into their own and are now being given opportunities that they haven't been given before, I think that's absolutely wonderful, and that is as it should be. But to say that that somehow now marginalizes me as a white male, I have a little difficulty with that.
No. But do you think that the pendulum will swing back?
It usually does, you know, in one way or another. And again, I mean, that's not to undermine the incredible strides that we're making and the fact that this is long overdue. But again, the point I want to make is that I think there's room for all of us.
The theater is supposed to educate us as well. I mean, these are opportunities for us to learn from these experiences.
Absolutely. And there's room for all of us at the table.
Absolutely. Well, as we wind down, I want to, I do some wind down questions. These are just some random questions that I pulled just for the fun of it, just to give everyone a chance to know you a little bit better. This book is incredible, and congratulations. And I want everybody to, whether you win, we're going to give away one copy tonight, but that doesn't mean you can't go out and buy it. And everybody knows somebody in the theater, or even if you're not in the theater, you will love reading this book. You will learn about the theater, and the interviews are phenomenal. So get the book. So the first question I'm going to ask you is, what is something that you were very self-conscious about?
Something I'm very self-conscious about? Something I'm very self-conscious about. Nothing is leaping to mind. I feel like I've done an awful lot of work on myself and might have been much more self-conscious in the past, but I'm sorry to disappoint, but nothing is really coming to mind for that one.
Well, that's perfectly fine. Next question. Which emotion do you struggle with the most, and why?
Struggle with the most. Because I tend to be a very upbeat person, and I don't know that this is entirely answering your question, but when someone is going through, shall we say, a dark period or a tough time, I tend to want to pull a Cher in Moonstruck and go, snap out of it. When that really, rather than allowing them to have their own truth and be where they need to be.
Okay, that's fine. I'll accept that. How does loyalty make you feel, both in your profession and in your personal life?
I think it's very important. I consider myself very loyal to the people in my life. I'm still in touch with many people that I've known, people that I did children's theater with in the basement of the YMCA. I'm having dinner with one of those friends tomorrow night. And I think, since this is a business of relationships, I think loyalty is key.
Absolutely. Totally. I have a calendar. Howard Tucker, who I mentioned earlier, gave me this calendar, which I appreciate. And it's called Daily Acts of Kindness. And I pulled a passage from and it said, find and share a positive news story on social media. We're constantly looking, and I mean, we talk about the negative, but I'd like you to share tonight a positive news story about, we hear negatives about things in the theater a lot. I'd like you to share something positive that you've read that's going on in the theater that you've read about recently.
Something positive that I've read about. The way people, and I don't know how recent, well, no, this is recent, is that the way people have been rallying in the theater community around people with COVID. For instance, when Sutton Foster was out of The Music Man with COVID, or Hugh Jackman, or more recently, various people in Funny Girl or other shows. And one of the things I love about the theater, one of many things, is that the way people support one another. And rather than people going, I paid that much money and I want my money back, and because I didn't get to see Hugh Jackman or whatever it is, people tend to be very forgiving, and they tend to be, well, I hope, using that as an example, I hope Mr. Jackman gets better. And the casts have just been rallying around and have been so incredibly supportive as we continue to go through this challenging time. And it's no secret that the theater is still just coming back. I mean, it's starting to, but getting audiences back into the theater is still a bit of a challenge. Absolutely. And so the fact that people are being supportive of that and supportive of their peers and doing what they can to cultivate the audiences and to bring the audiences back, I think is wonderful.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I mean, there was the whole controversy this past year about swings and understudies and standbys. And I believe everything happens for a reason. I'm very optimistic in that way. And I believe that it shed a light on these unsung heroes in the theater. Just last week, an actress who just got cast in Funny Girl said, did you see the posting?
I'm not sure that I did.
She got a call from her agent, and he said, I've got some good news and some somewhat news. You can take it as good or bad. And she's, okay, lay it on me. And he said, well, the good news is you got cast in Funny Girl. You're going to be standing by for Mrs. Streikosh, Mrs. Bryce, and I can't remember the name of the other card player. Somebody will fill me in. And she said, and what's the other news? He said, you're going on tonight.
Oh, my.
And he said, the good news is that you'll be sitting down playing cards for most of your scenes, so you'll have the script on the table. And he said, just get to the theater as soon as possible, and they're going to walk you through everything. And she went on that night. And because 4 of the standbys were out of the show with COVID. But she rallied, and she got there, and she went on and got a huge standing ovation when they explained at the end of the show what had happened. So God bless them.
God bless them indeed.
And this is an interesting question. Have you ever felt at any point in your career, speaking of the imposter syndrome, maybe that you just weren't yourself with any aspect of your career?
That I wasn't myself. I think when I have tried, here's a really good example of that. I think this is a good example of that. I was doing my one-man show at a small theater up in Northern California, and the audience was just not responsive. And there are a lot of laughs in the show that I wasn't getting, and I found myself getting angry. And I found myself starting to cut corners and starting to rush things that I would normally, not rush, etc. And then afterwards, several of them came up to me and said, "That was so wonderful." And just because they were a quiet audience, I misinterpreted their quietness. And so I've never done that again. And I feel like I learned an important lesson that way. Just because an audience member isn't vociferous, it doesn't mean they're not enjoying it in their own way.
Absolutely. I want to share a funny story. Leroy Reams said that he was.
I love Leroy.
I reached out to him. Also, he could not be here tonight, but Leroy said that he was doing Dolly with Carol Channing, and they were in Fort Lauderdale, and she comes back and she said, "This audience just doesn't like me." And he said, "Carol," he said, "they're grinning from ear to ear." She said, "Well, you can't hear a smile." So this is a two-part question. And while you're coming up with your answers for this, I'm going to bring this up. And again, the spirit of adventure, everybody, and I see that no one has responded. It's the spirit of adventure. So get it in there with the. You still have time. Two-part question. What are you most worried about with the next generation in the theater? And what are you most excited about with the next generation in the theater?
I don't know that I would call this worry as much as I would call it concern. I think it's very important, and maybe this is partially due to my background. I think it's very important that young artists have a sense of what came before them. A number of them probably wouldn't know Carol Channing, who you just mentioned. They certainly wouldn't know my mother, Eileen Heckert. But I think it's very important to have a sense of, one of the examples I use in the book that I will sometimes talk about is I'll say, oh, yes, it's like sometimes I just feel like, Lucy in the Candy Factory. And to our generation, we absolutely know what that analogy means, but a lot of them will be like, what? So I think it's important that they have a sense of history, because as we all know, history repeats itself. So in order to keep going and in order to really learn from their past, I really encourage my students to do that. The thing that I am probably the most excited about is the sense of enthusiasm, the sense of, again, getting back to an earlier conversation, the way things are opening up and the way other opportunities are being created for people who haven't had those opportunities before, I think is wonderful. And again, I think there is room for all of us at the table, and I'm very excited to see that continue and to see where that all goes.
And this will be my last question. And again, it's another two-parter. From the moment that you began in this business, and you've been and you've observed this business your entire life,
yes.
The business has changed a lot. What are the changes that you have observed that you absolutely love that you've seen change in the business? And what are the changes that you really miss that were once in place that you wish would come back?
One of the things I talk about in the book, Richard, is the sense of the specialness of an opening night, the sense of people the lost art of opening night cards.
Yes.
And opening night gifts. And, and I'm not talking necessarily gifts from Tiffany's. I'm talking, a handwritten note and a lollipop or whatever it is, but just something, because as you well know, an opening night is something special, is something sacred. And whether you've been working on this show for 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years, when you reach that point and you reach that moment, it's something that needs to be acknowledged. And I think it is a rite of passage to just, if not just say break a leg, to somehow acknowledge that to your fellow actors and to your fellow cast members. There are a number of times that I will give opening night notes to everyone in the cast and everyone in the crew. And if it's a musical, that can be a lot of people, especially if I'm doing a school show with a big cast. And a lot of times, very few people will even acknowledge that gesture, which frankly I find rather shocking. And yet at the same time, on the reverse side, people always do have that love and that sense of that aha moment of we're creating something that will never come again. And I don't think that will ever go away. And thank heavens for that.
Wow. Well, the other thing that's missing, opening nights, the telegrams.
Yes.
Carol Channing, again, who is a friend, she had scrapbooks full of all of her opening nights, the telegrams from around the world, including, may she rest in peace, the Queen of England.
Yes.
Wishing her a great opening night. So we're going to give away the book now. Don't go anywhere for a moment. Thank you all for being here tonight. One thing that I know I can speak for Luke when I say this, we don't take it lightly when you show up. So thank you all for being here tonight. Kevin Hall, thank you for, do you know Kevin, Luke?
I do not.
Kevin Hall is also a brilliant writer. Kevin, I would love to have you on the show sometime. He has an amazing memoir himself. Look him up. Please look him up.
I certainly will.
Because his book would make a great play. I'm telling you. He writes a great blog. He's a great songwriter. Kevin, get in touch with me, and I will put you and Luke in touch with each other, and you'll get an autographed copy of the book.
Absolutely.
So congratulations. I'm going to take this off the screen for a moment. I'm going to do this, and I want to thank you all for being here. Don't go anywhere for a moment, Luke, because I'm going to give you the final word tonight, as I always do. Spirit of adventure. Make that be your mantra as you go through every single day of your life. I was reading an article recently, and it said you set the tone the moment your feet hit the floor each day.
Yes.
And I think of that each day. I get up, I've got my morning routine, I go for a walk, and as I'm going for that walk each day, I'm thinking about the possibilities that day holds. I was thinking about tonight in the interview. Luke, I just think the world of you. And I'm hoping to get to the Drama Bookshop when you're going to be there. And the date again it's in my calendar.
The book signing at the Drama Bookshop will be on Sunday, October 23rd. Yes.
My calendar.
Yes, at 4 p.m. New York time.
Yes. So have you been to the Drama Bookshop since it's reopened?
I haven't had the pleasure. I'm very excited. When also my dear friend Peter Felicia, the critic extraordinaire, is going to be interviewing me that day about the book. He's also in the book. Good for him instead of me. I love him nonetheless. And good for you, Peter. I love both of you. Anyway, everybody, thank you for being here tonight. After tonight's show, please leave a comment on my YouTube channel. Share this with your friends. Let other people know about this. I also end every show by telling everyone to go out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. Mm-hmm. Go to your Facebook friends list and go to the 7th name that pops up and reach out with a phone call.
not an email message, not a text message, not a private inbox message, but a phone call. And let that person know what they mean to you. Because as my dear friend Sean Moniger always says, we're all in this together, but we're not in the same boat. You never know what someone else is going through right now. And then what I'd like you all to do when you call that seventh friend is I'd like you to tell them about this book. And then I'd like you to order, if you're able to do so, 2 copies of this book. Keep one for yourself and then send one to the seventh friend. Kevin, since you won this book, when you get this, I would like you to do a selfie and I would like you to post it on social media and tag both Luke and myself. And we'll get this out to as many people as possible.
Lovely.
We'll spread it around, as Carol Channing used to say, encouraging young things to grow. It's for the next generation. So keep doing that and letting people know about this. And as I also say, if you're going to go out in that boat, make sure you bring a skipper along. So, Luke, I'm going to leave the screen and I'm going to give you the final word. Anything that you want to say about anything that we talked about tonight that you want to build upon, anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had, or just any final message that you want to leave everyone with tonight. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the gifts that you've given to the world and that you are going to continue to give through this book, your other writings, your plays, and it just goes on and on and on. Thank you. And it's all yours.
Thank you, Richard. You know, I wanted to leave with a thought from the wonderful series about Julia Child. I believe it was simply called Julia, that was done on HBO, with my dear friend David Hyde Pierce playing her husband. And David and I have known each other for a very long time. But along the lines of what you were saying about the importance of positivity, the importance of reaching out to people, Richard and I are around the same age. And one of the things that, since Julia Child's career started very late, one of the things that her husband said to her at that point is, when most people are starting to close up shop, we're just getting going. And what would it look like if we just said yes to everything? And one day we're going to die. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we dropped dead having said yes? Wouldn't that be a life? I leave you with that. Thank you.